most decisions are reversible. Even the biggest, boldest ones, believe it or not, in most cases, are reversible. Even these big product initiatives, big investments, folks are like, wow, we go down this path, it's gonna be really hard to undo. It's like, you're right, it will be. Like, there'll be money spent, people hired, people that get shifted onto something else. But guess what? Like, it's all within the realm of possibilities. When I'm pushing folks to make these kinds of tough calls, I will be very explicit around like, let's look at it and see if it is a two-way door. Even if it doesn't feel like it is at first, like, let's really truly examine that. And then once we get to the point where it's time to just like sort of like make the decision and move on, I will very plainly say, like, I'm going to underwrite your decision no matter what you choose. Like, point blank, I'm going to underwrite it, and we're going to go either win or lose together. Funny enough, most of the time it goes pretty well. And when it doesn't, we'll learn something from it, and we'll be a little better next time.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the show, and I have a massive headache because I just had all the leftover birthday cake from my daughter's first birthday party. This episode is an interview with Ryan Roccon, the CFO of Zapier. Actually, it's Zapier, like happier. It's the first thing he actually tells me on the podcast, and I already got that wrong already. Outside of the standard X's and O's of accounting and finance, Ryan tells me that the number one skill is storytelling. But we say, hey, what does storytelling actually mean to you? And what are some ways that you can make storytelling real to people outside the finance organization? How do you talk to engineers about your financial profile? How do you make it relatable and use storytelling as an onboarding ramp to talking about your operating profile? Zapier operates in a highly transparent remote first model. We talk about how that impacts their approach to financial transparency and communication throughout the entire org. And DACI, at least we solved the Zapier thing. DACI frameworks. Great in theory, but I suck at getting people to use them. Maybe I can't get myself to use them, but they run them every single day. It's like a cultural thing at their company. They'll do it in Slack, and it helps them get to decisions faster. He takes us through a couple other frameworks for decision making and getting buy-in across the org, including fist to 5. This is a visual one, hint, hint. And it's not violent, don't worry. And finally, they're all about automation. We talk about how you can use automation within your own tool stack. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Does your revenue recognition process feel like a total guessing game? Step right up and pick a card, any card. You're not alone. Revenue accounting is getting more complex, especially with subscription models, usage-based billing, and evolving compliance standards. Woohoo! RightRev is here to help you gain control over your revenue accounting. RightRev automates the revenue recognition process from end to end. Whether it's multi-element arrangements, subscription renewals, or complex usage-based contracts, RightRev takes care of it all. That means fewer spreadsheets, fewer errors, and more time for your team to focus on growth. Customers like Snowflake, Logic Monitor, and Epicor chose RightRev to manage their high volume and complex revenue accounting. CFOs can see the bigger picture faster without being held up by their team's reporting nightmares. You know me, I'm a business model fanatic. And don't get me wrong, I love all the evolutions. We've got self-serve revenue, usage-based revenue, and now even success-based revenue, you name it. But that doesn't make it any easier for us being counters on the back end to keep score. RightRev is like a cheat code for staying ahead of revenue complexities. So you're ready to transform your revenue accounting? Visit RightRev.com to schedule a demo. That's RightRev.com and tell them your boy CJ sent. RightRev, modern revenue recognition simplified. Oh yeah. Listen, being a CFO, it's not always that glamorous. Sometimes I find myself watering the plants and taking out the garbage in the office. And, the best CFOs I know they're true business leaders. They know how to drive growth in heroic fashion. Unfortunately, the status quo of finance makes that really hard because day to day, we're mostly up to our eyeballs in spreadsheets and receipts. Thankfully, there's a financial provider who has built a solution to match your ambition, Brex. Brex designed a modern corporate card and spend platform that controls spend proactively and automates tedious expense and accounting tasks. Brex frees up CFOs to focus on high impact projects that drive growth. The shit that's actually worth your CFO time. So how does Brex work? You can embed your expense policy inside the corporate card to prevent out of policy spend before it happens. Receipts and memos are auto-generated, so you always have what you need to close the books fast. Managers get freed up from reviewing, every possible expense under the sun because in-policy expenses are auto-approved and AI will flag any exceptions. And all the while, your expense detail is syncing with your ERP because Brex integrates with almost all of them. I love that, from QuickBooks to NetSuite. It's your time to shine as the strategic growth driver you are, and Brex can make it easy. More than 30,000 companies like DoorDash, Coinbase, and SeatGeek use Brex to make every dollar and every minute count. Join them at brex.com/metrics. That's brex.com/metrics. Ryan, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
All right, Ryan, let's set the record straight once and for all. Is it Zapier or Zapier?
Yeah, we like to say Zapier makes you happier. That's the proper way to say it. That we've gotten all kinds.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. I worked at a company before called Sneak, and everyone, no one knew how to pronounce it. They call it Snike, Snook, Sneak. And then I found out after working there for 3 years that it really stood for So Now You Know, which I thought was clever. But it's funny when companies get named that they don't always anticipate that 5 years down the line, people will be still debating how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I think we blew some employees' minds who joined recently who didn't know the history of Zapier by showing them the original logo that has the API in the middle highlighted a different color.
Oh.
Yeah, so maybe I just blew your mind as well. That's where it came from.
Yeah, it's kind of like the FedEx logo if you look at it.
Yeah, right. Yep, with the arrow. Yep.
Okay, well, now that we got that out of the way, Zapier makes you happier, I can get to the hard-hitting questions. And financial storytelling, I know, is something that you're really passionate about, Ryan. And outside of the standard X's and O's of accounting and finance, I want to know why storytelling is so crucial. What does storytelling mean to you? Because people always use it in this buzz termy kind of way when it comes to finance. But like, what do you think storytelling is?
Yeah, definitely has some buzz around it. I mean, I guess first is, you can have a great financial model, but it's only as good as the execution that sort of makes it a reality. And so when I think about bridging that gap from model to execution, it starts with telling a really compelling story. And that story has to connect the what to the why and sort of promote action and urgency in order for it to be successful. And so I think it actually follows a very similar structure to any sort of traditional story, right? You kind of have like the setup, this like conflict, and then a resolution. But it obviously needs to be tailored to your audience as well, right? You got to like speak directly to them, reflect their level, their understanding of the company, their role, their tenure. If you do it really well, though, what you end up with is you effectively translate what is often a pretty complex financial story or financial data rather into a narrative that helps folks understand the company strategy, near-term objectives, long-term ambitions, the levers that will help sort of achieve those results, and then the things that they often have influence over. And ultimately you get to something that sort of like we all benefit in when it goes right. So that's sort of like the driving force behind a good financial story. But to be clear, there's definitely no perfect delivery vehicle here when it comes to that financial story. I can tell you that we've built quite a few assets over the years, all focused on telling the sort of a better version of a financial story, each better than the last. But I really do enjoy this process of seeing it click for folks, right? Where it's like you tell that story and they all of a sudden understand the importance of their work, how it connects back to the company strategy, and sort of how they can help influence each of those things.
We had Andy Raskin on, who's a consultant and an author who talks about the power of what he calls a strategic narrative. And he took us through kind of like how a lot of movies out there follow the same structure, like the hero's journey, if you go back to Star Wars. And he had a really unique way of laying it out that you can apply with your company's story. So it becomes more of like something with a plot rather than just like numbers on a page.
Oh, it absolutely has to be that way. I mean, like any good story, you have to keep your reader's attention. And if you don't set it up that way, you'll lose them right off the bat.
I really like, Ryan, how you picked out that it depends on who the audience is. Can you just speak to why that's critical? Because a lot of times you're juggling the same numbers, but it sounds like you're almost form-fitting it to who's receiving that information.
Yes, for sure. I mean, but when you treat it like a story, you again have to set it up in a way that sort of like sets the stage. You can't just hit people over the head with CAGR and BIPs and all of these financial terms. You really got to like sort of like build the story for them. So if you're thinking about a team like product or engineering or like a build team, right? You might start by saying, okay, Zapier, we're a leader in the AI space, but we want to make a bigger investment. Here's why we want to make that investment. Here's what the market is telling us. Here's why we need to do it now. And then you sort of introduce the conflict, right? Again, telling the story. You go, well, if we don't do this, here's the disruption that we face. Here's what could happen to our growth rate in this segment if we don't invest now. And then finally you get to the sort of resolution part, which is, okay, so here are the things we actually need to do. And so you get to the audience. This is where the audience comes into play. If I'm an engineering or product, again, if I hit you with a million different sort of CAGRs or year-over-year growth rates or all these different things, that might not make sense to you. But what I can show you is sort of like, here's the growth that we're striving towards, but here are the things that need to happen for that to happen effectively. So like we need to have these capabilities shipped by these dates. We need this many users to interact with them. We need these users to convert based on this rate. Like these are tangible deliverables that are tied to maybe a clearly defined launch moment and discussed usually like in whole numbers, right? Not like abstract concepts. And folks can then go back to their backlog and say, well, okay, now I understand why it's important. I think these things on the backlog are going to be most relevant for sort of achieving that goal. And then here's how I'm going to prioritize them. So again, it's like you set the stage, tell the story. Some financial terms in there will help sort of like determine the degree to which you're sort of striving towards a result, but ultimately you got to convert it into like hard and fast units that folks understand.
I love that. Hard and fast units that people understand. It's kind of like the saying that you got to meet your customers where they want to transact. It's like you got to meet your audience where they're going to be able to understand what you're saying. And something that I've been trying to get better at as a leader over the last couple of years, Ryan, is inserting my audience into the story when I'm talking to the team internally. And what I mean by that is, and I was seeing you do it there with like the engineering team, but like when I talk to the engineering team, yes, I'll be using the same metrics, but I'm talking about like their influence on the product or calling out like this team over here built a product that drove X million dollars in revenue.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly critical. I mean, we try to do it to the point where just about anybody at the company can clearly draw a line to the work that they're doing and how it influences the strategy. You know, I have procurement is one of the teams that reports up through finance, and it's awesome to see how they realize the tools that they are sort of acquiring are then going on to be tools that are employed by, you know, engineering teams and things to ship things faster to get in the hands of customers. And it's just like, you know, sometimes the line is a little curvy or dotted, but you can see it, and explaining that and helping folks make that connection is like, it's one of our core focuses at Zapier on the finance team.
And it helps them take it personally,
Yeah.
right? Like they can get out of bed each day and be motivated about that. Like I'm not just buying software. I'm doing something that I can trace from point A to point B to point Z. And it's actually in the customer's hands and showing up in revenue.
Exactly.
This is a question, asking for a friend here. Do you ever feel like you're repeating yourself or going almost into potentially falling into robot mode when telling a story for the thousandth time, like the company story?
Yeah. Yes, is most definitely the answer. We talk about that a lot on the exec team. We say we have to repeat ourselves till we're sick. And as a matter of fact, we do this quarterly kickoff hangout where we sort of reflect back on the last quarter and talk about what we need to do for the next quarter. And almost every one of them, I start off by saying, I know you're sick of me saying this. I'm going to keep saying it because it's important. So yeah, I'd say maybe tip one is a little levity never hurts, right? Just to kind of keep things fresh. But for me, I think the way that I've navigated this idea of just like avoiding robo mode, or like the antidote to that, is while the story itself needs to have a consistent through line, the way in which you tell it, like the medium and the story can change and sort of evolve over time. And so at Zapier, it's like, I mean, I have a laundry list of things that we've done over the years that we've kept and built on that sort of are all on this vein of thinking. Happy to share more about some of those if it's useful. Or
yeah, I would love to hear more about that, because the story evolves over time, right? It's not a static thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so like, okay, so ways in which we repeat ourselves. So right off the bat, something we do at Zapier, which is very unique, and we can certainly talk more about later, but is that we are just a very transparent organization. So every year, right when we start the year, we have our sort of annual board meeting that sets the budget for the year. That whole board meeting, that whole package gets shared with the company. It gets sort of like polished and shared out, and I do a voiceover going through it, and I talk about sort of the key drivers to the annual plan, you know, the budget that we set, and just what we're expecting for the year. So it's like we set the stage right off the bat by sort of telling the story for the next year. Okay, and we sort of, again, give the story straight from the board. Then every quarter we go into sort of the reflection mode that I just mentioned, where we kind of look back and say, hey, how are we doing? How is this getting us closer to the goals that we set for the year? Reinforcing those same key drivers. So again, same through line, right? We're talking about the same key drivers. How are we performing? And how are they getting closer to the goals that we set for the year? Then something that we do that I'm a huge fan of that we developed years and years ago, but we've refined a ton over the last few years, is we have a monthly financial update, which we've automated in Looker Studio. It's really beautiful visualization. And we just sort of pull the data every month. And I do a voiceover that goes with it called the why behind the numbers. And again, the point here is that this product, it captures a bunch of high level SaaS metrics, all the things you'd expect, like ARR, NRR, broken down by component, funnel activity, acquisition trends, a bunch of other financial data like revenue per employee and cash generated, all these really great metrics. But like just on the page by themselves, they're interesting. It's great to see the trends. But now with this story that I attached to it, the why behind the numbers, I can connect it back again to the strategy and those key drivers and say, hey, remember we're driving for this kind of quantity in P1 leads, and that's helping drive up the ARR that we're seeing in this particular lane, and that's helping inflect NRR in this cohort over here. And so like tying it all back together, and that's happening every single month. We've got a bunch of other products in addition to that, like another one that I'm really proud of at Zapier, we call it our key progress metrics. It's updated daily, and it has, again, a lot of those same metrics, but the thing that's really unique about this one is we actually, again, wrote it in a story form on Looker Studio. And so it's got like, sort of like, here's where Zapier came from. Here's where Zapier is going. Wow. Here's the key pillars within our bets. And here's all the things that need to be true for these to be successful. And folks can log on literally any day of the week and see sort of like how the actuals versus targets are trending. It's just one more example. But yeah, I mean, I've got literally like probably 5 more things that we're either currently building or have built that are all under the same purpose of just like repeating and telling the story in a similar but slightly different way in a different medium, so folks can sort of access it in a way that they feel most comfortable.
You know, I've come to feel that the term templatizing is actually not a dirty word. And we were talking to Naeem Ishak, the CFO of Checker, and he said, it's great, CJ. It actually reduces cognitive load. And it sounds like what you're doing is you're giving people an easier on-ramp to understand metrics that may change, but the format in which you deliver it is something that's digestible.
100%. And I mean, it goes even beyond those things that are completely templatized. That we do something that I think is really interesting is that we do like benchmarking every year where we look at our peers and we sort of plot ourselves, and we actually write a big, quite a significant post around that. Again, trying to help explain, tie the story back to here's where we are on this sort of S curve of growth. Remember why these things are important. Now let's go look at our benchmarks and see the companies who've done this well, look at their enterprise value, look at what the kind of customers they're serving, and look at where they're sort of aspiring to. And it all ties it back and helps folks really understand like why we're doing these things beyond just the what we're doing.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report with accuracy? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built solutions for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks with minimal IT involvement, enabling seamless collaboration across your organization's key financial workflows. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unmatched scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Visit planful.com/metrics to see how you can elevate your team this year with Planful. They will hook you up. It is planful.com/metrics. Tell them your boy CJ sent you. Planful.com/metrics. Trust isn't earned, it's demanded. Whether you're a startup founder navigating your first audit or a seasoned security professional scaling your GRC program, proving your commitment to security has never been more critical or complex. That's where Vanta comes in. Businesses use Vanta to establish trust by automating compliance needs across over 35 frameworks, like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Centralized security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risk. Vanta not only saves you time, it can also save you money. A new IDC white paper found that Vanta customers achieve $535,000 per year in benefits, and the platform pays for itself in just 3 months. Join over 9,000 global companies like Atlassian, Cora, and Factory, who use Vanta to manage risk and improve security in real time. For a limited time, our audience, Get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/metrics. That's vanta.com/metrics for $1,000 off. That's really good. Is there a story or an analogy that you frequently use to simplify a complex financial concept for people? What Zapier does?
Yeah, I mean, luckily we don't have to chat with investors because we're bootstrapped and we really don't have any primary investment. That's not
quick plug for Bootstrap.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I was going to say, the finance team's hiring. So if anybody's looking, it's a great environment when you're privately held without significant investment. We as a company, we use a ton of analogies to rally folks around these sort of ideas and mantras. We've been using the same sort of one over the last few years here. And it's something we sort of like weave into the strategic narrative, but it's more at the bet level where we're kind of talking about, hey, remember, these are the problems that we're solving for our customers. For me, I've never really found like that secret sauce analogy that I really, really like. I use all the standard ones that folks might be familiar with, like talking about the leaky bucket for net revenue retention, or we're like sort of visualizing a funnel to explain, how folks are kind of where they're dropping off and how they're getting down to sort of like our paying users. But honestly, I think where I found the most success is just like really well-designed, simple charts that I, like you mentioned, sort of templatize or repeat on a regular basis. So folks become really intimately familiar with them and can just like glance at them and understand what I'm getting at. One of the ones that I've been using a lot lately, that I've sort of started putting in the beginning of every quarterly kickoff, is just a really, really basic, simple rule of 40 chart that has profitability on one side and growth rate on the other, and sort of a cross-cutting line that says, you have to be up and to the right of this to be greater than the rule of 40. And we just plot all of our data points over the last few years and sort of all the data points that we have going forward. And that really is like, it's become this like very easy thing to point at and say, hey, remember, this is where we're going. This is why this is important. Again, tie it back to this benchmarks. In that case, it's like that picture is worth definitely more than 1,000 words, I'd say. It's become like a sort of a mainstay in how we talk about our performance.
Hey, when you think about benchmarks, how much has the cohort of companies you compare yourself changed over the years? Has it been kind of the same group, you think, or are you, reaching up to be a part of a higher echelon each year in terms of who you compare yourself to?
No, I mean, it's a great question. It's definitely, I mean, there's a core group of folks that we've always compared ourselves with that we will continue to do so. And most of those are in that group set because they operate very similar to us. They're generally like, PLG companies, or at least were founded that way, who've expanded upmarket over time, serving a large customer base. We have on the fringes, though, absolutely added folks that we're aspiring to be more like, especially as we move more upmarket. And then I'd also consider the fact that, as our pricing structures changed, we start to compare ourselves with folks who are more usage-based. And similarly with like the, emergence of AI, there's definitely companies that are sort of coming out of the woodwork on that front that are becoming interesting comps as well. So yeah, it never stays static, but there's definitely a core few that we think are good proxies that are just great companies too, that we always want to emulate.
That's so true. I think I've become pickier and pickier over the years with benchmarks, especially to your point around pricing and how the company sells. I think when I first started using benchmarks, I thought, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like, I want to be like Snowflake too. They're trading at this multiple, but then you dig into it, you're like, well, maybe I have a marketplace element to it. Maybe I have a PLG element to it. And then you can refine it over time to be more academically honest.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the rules are for plugs, but we use tool Public Comps. That's fantastic. It's awesome.
Oh, they're great.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just like, I'll go in there and grow in a high growth SaaS sector, or I'll go, just like B2B or sort of like enterprise sales. And just, it's so simple to toggle between PLG, all these different motions, and just kind of get like a range of comps that are just, it's really useful.
Ryan, I told you that sometimes I get distracted. I'm like a dog that sees a car go by and I chase it. How does storytelling come into play when you're recruiting new employees? How do you describe like the company's story and then their potential outcome as employees?
As I mentioned here, I mean, obviously I like to use benchmarks because that's publicly available data to kind of show them like, hey, here's the value of the company that's operating at these sort of like productivity metrics and this growth rate and so on and so forth. And that's generally how I'll sort of set the stage of like, because oftentimes you can't really come out and say, hey, we think we're worth exactly this much. Yeah. But you can help folks sort of like paint the picture. And that's something, like I said, we regularly reinforce, not only for folks that are considering joining Zapier, but folks who are on board and within Zapier. And then we also will provide like a calculator effectively that says, at this level, we're very upfront around, we offer an exact amount of equity per level and per role. And we'll make that really clear and say, here's the calculator that goes with it. And you can effectively plug in, here's your options. Here's what the value would be given these different enterprise values over time. And you can see what this grows to. And it does kind of help tie it back together. Like this is the potential for you as an individual as Zapier continues to grow.
You are one of the most transparent orgs I think I've ever come across.
So, well, funny enough, it's, we have 5 core values at Zapier, and default to transparency is one of them.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, a lot of people say that their company is a value-driven company. Zapier means it when they say that. I remember from when I first joined the company, it was like week 1, I was in Slack and I sent a DM to somebody and they immediately responded and said, this should be in a public channel because other people need to be learning from this like question. And I mean, I had just joined and it was just like some person on Slack. I was like, oh man, like they're not kidding around.
Where does this originate from? Is it because you're a remote first company?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we're a remote first company. We're a remote founded company, right? I mean, we've been in this boat since well before it was, forced upon us. And we've built pretty much every part of Zapier, every process and policy and just like system with this in mind. We are definitely a very like writing heavy culture. And we just have defaulted to sort of like, the more that we can share out in the open, the more informed folks can be and just make more thoughtful and well-informed decisions. So, I mean, it happens within finance, definitely at a degree that's much greater than most companies, but it's certainly across every part of the business.
And that's what I want to hit on because part of me is really excited about this, but the CFO part is like, oh shit, like that's a lot of sharing. I don't know if that's too much. How do you square that as a CFO?
I mean, there's a couple different angles to that. There's the too much sharing, and because everything's important, nothing is important. And then there's the too much sharing as in you share data that no one should have had access to. So the second version, I can promise, we're very thoughtful about that. We've built all those controls and we're not going to share anything confidential or share something at a granularity that lets you sort of like drill into somebody's individual paycheck or something. Thank goodness. So that part we've got pretty well solved. The other part, though, to your point, there's a fine line, right? Like you can share too much, create anxiety, or just create confusion. Like folks just don't know where to focus. And so, interesting story about that. We had an amazing former CFO who joined us a few years back, and when he joined, we built a new WBR process. It was our first time. We had switched through a few different versions of sort of like how we kept ourselves accountable, but we wanted to introduce the WBR sort of process. And when he joined, he literally asked for every metric. I mean, like thousands of metrics. And we spent the next few months putting every one of them on a page. It was a huge undertaking. It was also amazing to be frank. Like I had been there for 4 years at that point, and I learned more in that 6 months than I think I had learned in the last 4 years. It was just like, there's something to be said about just putting it all on the page, even if it's not the most important stuff. But then what we did do is we turned that into our WBR templates. We sort of broke it down by investment lane. And we started sharing that with the leaders, and we would have this sort of, these WBRs with these like really large FP&A driven WBR templates with a lot of metrics. And at first it was great. We got lots of great sort of discussions happening and making important decisions from them. But it wasn't more than I'd say a couple of months before those discussions started to go awry, where folks were like picking the metric that was doing well, even though it had nothing to do with what was most important, or just like completely ignoring some subset of the metrics that were like really critical because there was just so many. You could kind of get easily like distracted and go off course. And so we took the idea behind it, and we kept those files in the background for the FP&A team, and we used that to sort of like drill deeper and really stay close to the numbers. But we took the intention, and we simplified it by building dashboards that were limited. We put a bunch of rules in place. I literally, okay, you can't break these rules. There can't be more than 10. They have to be more heavily weighted towards input metrics. They have to be in priority order. You can't have more than one line on the chart. So no multiple axes. And you have to have a clear definition right next to the metric. It has to say like, what is this measuring and why is it important? And then there has to be a target line. It can't just live in isolation. It can't just be like, here's a number. It has to have, what should this number be? And so we sort of took that really giant WBR file, kept it for ourselves, and like boiled it down to those things that we think are most important. Because we ran into some of those issues that you talked about, just keeping folks focused on the right things.
It feels like that Thoreau line, like, sorry, I didn't have time to write you a shorter letter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the truth is though, is even in this new version, while it's a massive improvement, it's still just not like it's not there. Like we have more to do. Like we got to make it better. Like we got to keep the conversations focused on the most important things.
Ryan, we talked about oversharing potentially making people either zone out or get confused. Do you ever worry about oversharing in the sense of creating anxiety amongst employees?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we come across every once in a while. I mean, honestly, I think folks will self-regulate where like they'll read the things they want to read and dig into the details where they want. And I think that's part of how you have to serve it up. You kind of have to give them, to your earlier comment, that monthly financial update that we built, it's about 15 metrics, the 15 that we think are most important. You can just read that every month and that's good. Like maybe you go, okay, yeah, great. The business is growing. We're hitting these goals. Wonderful. Or you can watch the video and go a little deeper. Or you can join the WBR, or you can sort of click into our KPM dashboard and read the more like granular level metrics. I think it's a matter of like the folks who really are like hungry for that information will take that initiative. And the folks who are just kind of want the sort of like higher level, like we'll tee it up in that way and let you sort of choose your own adventure. So
I was going to say, choose your own adventure. That's exactly what it sounds like. Like if you want to go that deep, bro, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, there's always risk that you're going to overwhelm folks with information, but I'd rather err on the side of sharing too much than sharing too little.
The hardest one that I've run into a lot is when the company's 409A changes in a way where it actually goes down, and then you have to explain to employees what it means. That's always a hard one for me to get across.
Yep, the 409A is always an interesting one. Yeah, there's certain language you have to be sure to use when you're talking about a 409A. So it's definitely, that one's a tricky subject at times.
What's your take on having a board plan and then an operating plan? And I ask this because you're very transparent about like the performance that you expect out of the business, but there is somewhat of a need to guard the org as the CFO against things like big deal risk or attrition. So how do you square that?
Yeah, well, as you're aware, and I mentioned earlier, Zapier is a bootstrap company, and we've been running cash flow positive since forever, effectively.
But even with revenue, Ryan, like quotas and stuff, do you share with the reps like everything?
So I guess let me answer the first part, and then I'll talk about the quota part. So the reason I share about the whole bootstrap thing is because when we build our plan, this question around like how much cushion do you put in, we build it with that as a principle, that we're like a sort of like unbreakable rule that like we're going to be cash flow break even or better. And so when we go through that process, we effectively do. So we create the board and the sort of like management plan, and the management plan effectively is the one that is goaling us to sort of like our aspirations, where the board plan is like what we have committed to, and we're going to build the budget around to maintain this cash flow break even sort of like requirement or better. And to build those things in, as you mentioned, some of the like big deal risk doesn't exist for Zapier today. I mean, we've been a PLG company historically. We are just now sort of expanding up market and serving larger customers. And it's only been over the last, call it year and a half, 2 years, that we've introduced a sales team. And quotas are only a recent development at Zapier, believe it or not.
Whoa.
Yes. And so sales for us is a new motion. And it's very like, we are just getting into the kind of conversations that you're talking about. To your point, like quota attainment or like looking at those kinds of things, that starts to get to a level where the transparency, you start to violate like individual privacy if you're not careful. We'll want to ride the line of showing, maybe distributions of things to say, hey, look, here's how attainment is stacking up against our goals and why we need to either raise or lower it going forward. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be something we're going to sort of navigate as we go. But it's been, like I mentioned, it's a unique question for Zapier because of our very unique position. It's something we haven't had to deal with often, to be honest with you.
It's an amazing position to be in. And I'd guess that a certain mindset comes out of, having this unmovable rock that we have to be cash flow positive. and it probably plays out all through the company culture.
It does. And we talk about it often, because folks want to know why it's important. And the obvious, reasons stand of, the war chest and like rainy day fun and being able to take advantage of opportunities when we see them. But to be fair, it's something that I sort of get alignment from the board and the exec team every year. Before we even get into the planning cycle, I sort of set the stage of like, here's the principles I'm operating under and why I think these are the right ones. And I sort of, ask folks to sort of raise their hand and like dispute them and walk me through why we should be willing to violate those ones. Because those rules exist to be violated with the right sort of opportunity.
Yeah.
But it's a good way to kind of keep folks rowing in the same direction for the most part.
Are there any other big rules similar to that, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, that is the primary one. I'd say most of the other rules are less so rules and more ambitions. We kind of align around like how we want to structure headcount on like where we're willing to forward invest. We also align around, like certain growth rates within the company as far as like where we want to be by the end of the year and where we're willing to sort of like reallocate investment from one bucket to another. But those change year over year. Those are a little bit more fungible. But I'd say the sort of this cash flow break even or better is a pretty consistent one.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Do you get down to a fully burdened P&L by product line, or is that something that's not really relevant?
Yes and no. So we do, but right now it's a finance internal only sort of like product. So talking about the whole transparent thing, it's something that I actually want to spin up a summarized version and share with the entire company. We go back, we do an engagement survey, and sometimes we get this question around like, I don't understand why we're investing in this particular part of the business right now. Like I can't see a clear, like, why is it worth it? Like we're spending a lot of money and what's the return? And so with this P&L by product line, where we do try to fully burden it, which I will add the caveat that like some things are much more direct and easy. Other like allocated costs are a little bit more generic and we kind of have ignored some of them for now. But with that being said, the intention is we don't just do it in isolation. We don't say, okay, this product cost us this much this month and it delivered this much, this month. And so it's operating at a loss. We sort of project out into the future and we say, okay, look, we're making this investment today on this product. And yes, it is operating at a loss currently, but in 6 months, we think it's going to be here. And in 12 months, we think it's going to be here. And if you look at the actual investment, sort of like ROI, it's just much more significant than this other lane where we're investing less. And so that's the ultimate goal is like, again, peek behind the curtains, help folks buy into the decisions we're making around where we're sort of placing our bets. But more work to come on getting it in the hands of folks and getting it truly fully burdened.
So I ask because I'm in a very similar situation as you, where as a finance person in my own office, I've come up with P&Ls by product line, but I very rarely made a person responsible for it. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road, because like I'll create a contribution margin analysis or P&L by product line. And I'm like, great, now I have it. But it's like, did I give it to someone if I want to change the answer? Did I make it so they were responsible for it?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I mean, fortunately for us, like the way that we structure it, it's the products sort of line up to the functional leaders who are responsible for them in the first place. So there's already kind of like a naturally defined owner who sits over each of them. Or at least a group of them. So there's like not a lot of ambiguity there, but to your point, actually handing it to them and saying, this is yours to manage now. Like this is the budget. This is the envelope for the next 6 to 12 months, whatever it might be. We don't do that yet today. I would love to get there, but it is a tricky one to sort of make the transition from like the functional budget to the full P&L budget management.
It is. Yeah. Ryan, I want to talk about decision making a bit. And you had told me that you use the DACI framework. And I have this theory that everyone wants to use the DACI, but few use it like in reality. How do you get everyone to buy in?
It's funny. There's a debate. What is it actually called, DACI or DACI? I've always said DACI.
Zapier.
So I think we have the opposite problem at Zapier, if I'm honest with you, because the fact that we are so like writing heavy, everybody uses it, like everybody at every level. And there's no sort of like push to get people to use it. I'd actually say, honestly, it is the opposite. Sometimes folks will write a DACI for something that could have just been like a Slack message and could have been solved with like a quick, 10-minute meeting. But honestly, that remote first culture, it's tilted us really heavily towards like writing memo style. And a lot of folks have leaned into that. And I think on top of that, it just like the ambiguity that it removes by clearly laying out those different categories, it helps folks just like cut through the noise and get to decisions faster. So if I had to wager a guess, I think I probably get something like 5 DACIs, however you want to say it, a week.
Do you really?
I do. Yep. And I mean, they come from every level of the org. So like a few examples of ones that just popped up. Like I had one pop up that was from accounting, and they were asking around like gap treatment on this unique credit situation and whether we should like rush to fix something or if it was okay to let it sit. Or I got one from, partners on this like really interesting investment opportunity, this partner relationship that we were exploring, whether we should like go more in depth now or wait. Then I got one from legal around whether we should open up a new entity and like what the risks are of this country versus that country. And so, I mean, that's like a regular occurrence at Zapier. These things are just constantly being churned up.
So anyone could call one. Like if I reported to you, Ryan, I could be like, hey, Ryan, let's do a quick DACI here.
Yeah, for sure. And that's generally how it will go. It's like when the decision is relatively important, you'll sort of like do a local DACI for that group. So like the accounting one stopped with me. It was like they sort of got feedback from folks across the team, and then it came to me, and I was sort of like the ultimate decision maker in that one. For a lot of other ones, though, we actually have a channel in Slack called Feed Bullpens, and you submit, it's for the exec team, but anybody has access to it, and you submit a DACI in there and a quick little description, and like our executive assistant team will schedule the relevant execs to meet live if necessary. So they'll be tagged in the DACI. We have to go in and put in a response by a certain date. And if there's misalignment, then we'll have a live meeting scheduled. If there's clear alignment to start, then no meeting necessary. But that feed, like that Slack channel, again, I probably see, a couple a week at least.
This is next level. I wish I was this organized.
It is truly next level. The systems and processes we have for this kind of decision making at Zapier, it's pretty impressive.
Last question on this. I'm so fascinated by how effective it is. Do you tactically do it in Slack, or is it in like a Word doc or a memo somewhere?
It's in a Word doc. Yeah, we have a template. Okay. We have a template, and it is intentionally like fixed. You can't really like change the format much. You have to stick to sort of like the main components.
Okay, awesome. What's first to 5?
So it's technically fist to 5.
Fist to 5. Wow, it got violent real quick. Let's
exactly.
do this.
I mean, it can, depending on what scores you get. So that's fist to 5. It's a pretty simple, but I'd say somewhat powerful like voting mechanism. And so fist, as you might imagine, is like a 0, right? And that represents something that you're strongly opposed to. 5, something you're effectively fully aligned to. You don't have any remaining questions. And so we use it all over the place. But for example, sometimes you'll join a meeting and there'll be some really tricky topic that we're all talking about. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely experienced this circumstance where you start going around the room, kind of doing a little round robin, like, hey, what do you think? And the next person to go will go like, just like so-and-so on the left of me said, let me elaborate a little bit more. By the time you get all the way around, it's like, you're all saying the same thing. And you just question like, is somebody holding back because they didn't want to be sort of like the person who maybe said something completely different? And because you're kind of going in order, it's a bit of like, you get to cheat and see what your neighbor says first. So oftentimes I'll actually start the meeting with this thing. So we'll say, hey, we're trying to decide on this particular investment topic, initiative, whatever. Like you all have all read this document. You understand what we're asking. Like the question is, should we make this investment today? Based on what you read in the document, fist to 5. And all at once, live on the video, throw up your score. What do you think? And you get a few things. If you get all 5s, well, it must be a pretty damn good idea. And folks are pretty clearly aligned to it. If you get nothing but 0s, it sounds like maybe you skipped a few steps and shouldn't be at that sort of for a decision yet, right? But where things get very interesting is when you start to get some consensus. You get 10 people and like 7 of them are 4s or 5s, and then there's 3 that are like 1s. And those outliers are the ones that usually have really interesting takes. And sometimes, again, those takes get a little bit overshadowed if you're kind of doing this like group discussion, or maybe the person doesn't feel like confident enough to speak up. And so this really just like forces folks to pick a side without knowing how everyone else feels. And then the second thing we use it for is at the end of the meeting, whether or not we started with it, it's the way to kind of like, we call it like the exit row check as well. Sort of like, hey, before we leave, Like, let's see it again. Like, where are we all at? Are we feeling like this is the right decision? Do you have lingering questions? And you'll go back around the room again. And again, if somebody's still sitting at a 3, it's like, we didn't solve it. Like, we have not convinced this person. Like, we got work to do. Let's come back and figure this out.
This is so cool because by human nature, we're tribal creatures. Like, we want to be accepted. And if you went around and I hear that, our CMO is a 5 in the way that he's talking about it, our chief product officer is a 4, and then I'm sitting here and I don't want to crap all over this and like stick out as a sore thumb. This totally cuts through it.
It does. I mean, that's funny. So you were talking about some of the principles for financial planning that we use. So last year, I actually wrote this big document that sort of laid all those out around like, hey, here's how we want marketing spend to sort of grow next year. Here's some of the, again, cash flow sort of like principles that we're building. I laid out all of these different decisions and I gave it to each exec blind. I made a copy for each of them. And then I put within each of those things, I made it in an affirmative statement. We are going to hire this many people in this org. And then I made them vote 0 to 5. And then I consolidated all the scores and I sort of gave them a readout of like, this is where we clearly are all thinking the same way. And this is where we have very different opinions on how we should be running the business. So let's reconcile those things. So I find it a really useful mechanism just to cut through the noise and get folks aligned.
Are people ever do they feel a little bit blindsided, like there's going to be friction, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, no, not really. I think like if nothing else, it's not friction as much as it is like a productive discussion. It's just like, you'd almost rather have friction now. It's like, you want friction now, not friction when you're about to ship the thing or about to, right, go hire a dozen people to go do it. It's like, get the friction out early. That's what this is intended to do.
Ryan, it feels like you're the type of CFO who wants to empower others on your team to make decisions. I can tell just by the way we're talking about frameworks and also the transparent culture that you have. How do you make it safe to fail while also expecting a high level of performance?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question. I love this topic. I mean, some interesting context. We do a personality test at Zapier when we start called the Berkman, among dozens of others throughout. But like, that's when we do for new hires. And there's a measure called restlessness, 0 to 100. I'm 99 on restlessness. It's like off the charts. I'd say I'm very action oriented, to say the least. And so in order to be action oriented, I think you have to make a lot of decisions. You have to make them pretty quickly. So the first thing I do to help empower folks to make decisions is to just model that behavior, right? Like when I'm presented with a tough choice, I don't jump to the decision. I ask a lot of questions. And in the end, oftentimes I don't really need to even make the decision. Sort of like, I just make sense of what's happening and then the decision makes itself. But throughout that process, sometimes it's rambling, sometimes it's winding, but I will sit there and sort of like talk out loud through what is entering my head as I'm hearing the sort of problem we're discussing. And again, I will like have them part of that process with me to sort of hear how I'm thinking through and where I'm sort of like, okay, that's a worthwhile risk. That one doesn't feel as confident. But part of that process, obviously we're going to rely on a whole bunch of data analysis, but I also tell folks like, that can only be part of the story. Like it's not going to make the decision for you, and you can't get caught up in the data like just 100%. And so some of the things that I try to just remind folks of are, not to get caught up not only in that, but just like the opportunity cost of not making a decision, or this realization that most decisions are reversible. Even the biggest, boldest ones, believe it or not, in most cases, are reversible.
Can you say more about that? Is that the concept of one-way versus two-way doors?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the idea of one-way versus two-way. It's like I talk about two-way doors constantly. Even these big product initiatives, big investments, folks are like, wow, we go down this path. It's going to be really hard to undo. It's like, you're right. It will be. Like, there'll be money spent, people hired, people that get shifted onto something else. But guess what? Like, it's all within the realm of possibilities. People sort of lock up when it comes to making these decisions, especially the ones that feel like that. There's a fear around decisions. The root word of decide is to cut off. That's the Latin root of decide. And so it's like cutting off future choices or cutting off opportunity. And so it has this like finality around it, right? Folks just like react that way. When I'm pushing folks to make these kinds of tough calls, I will be very explicit around like, let's look at it and see if it is a two-way door. Even if it doesn't feel like it is at first, like let's really truly examine that. And then once we get to the point where it's time to just like sort of like make the decision and move on, I will very plainly say like, I'm going to underwrite your decision no matter what you choose. Like point blank, I'm going to underwrite it, and we're going to go either win or lose together. Funny enough, most of the time it goes pretty well. And when it doesn't, we'll learn something from it, and we'll be a little better next time.
I did not know that's what it meant in Latin. Decision means to
The
cut
root
off.
word, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Root word. Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. I have a couple of miscellaneous ones for you here, Ryan. Your company is all about automation. If you could automate one part of your job as CFO, what would it be and why?
This is kind of maybe not the best answer, but we have all these international entities and just like constant filings. I have to notarize things and get stuff apostilled and FedExed just like every other week.
That's the worst.
So I'm just trying to figure out how do I do that? How do I get this to be automated? I mean, I just don't understand how we can't get to the day and age where like a notary can't be digital. But anyways, I mean, I know they have notary online services now, but
I'm with you. Wet ink, that's the worst.
Besides that, I think the bigger thing that less so me and more as a company, we're just trying to automate as much of the financial reporting as we possibly can. Like we've got all these different assets that all like ladder up into each other. So like, I don't want to like repeat the same thing that I'm building for the board doc, for our quarterly MBR, for our kickoff, for XYZ. So we're trying to like create sort of almost like components, modular components that we can just like repurpose pretty quickly. Because otherwise we find ourselves just like spending a lot of time just rebuilding the sort of like the template for each round.
Couldn't agree with you more. What's the US Steel and Stanley Cup story?
Okay, so this is a funny one. When I was in school, I was an intern on the finance team at US Steel, big Fortune 500 company. I'm from Pittsburgh originally. It was awesome. I got to go to all the plants, and I worked in the office, but on site at the plants. And at one of the plants, I had a phone there that happened to be the phone number associated with US Steel. If you went and Googled US Steel, literally, like if you Googled US Steel, the phone number that popped up was the number that rang to my desk. And I would get random phone calls all the time. And it was sort of like this, like, should I answer it? So I'd pick up the phone. And one time I picked it up, and it was the commissioner from the National Hockey League. And he was responsible for the Stanley Cup doing a photo shoot because the Detroit Red Wings were playing the Pittsburgh Penguins in the Stanley Cup final in Pittsburgh. And they wanted to shoot a spot where they had the Stanley Cup in front of them pouring steel with like the sparks flying everywhere. And I thought it was a joke. I was like, I have no idea. This is wild. And so I got my boss, and I'm like, you got to talk to them. And we usually didn't allow anybody in the facility because it's, obviously like a very safety oriented facility, but they made some exceptions and they got them in there. And so I'm wearing my full PPE, hard hat, steel toed boots, gloves, all that stuff. And I'm sitting on this giant stack of like ingot, like metal with my arm around the Stanley Cup while they're pouring steel behind me. So I have this picture, but it's a really funny story because it's sort of a little bit of a reflection on my career in some ways. It's like, I've always just been willing to like do the things on the fringe and just like go learn about something interesting. I was like, I wasn't really learning much on the phone, but like, it almost didn't matter. I was like, sure, give me something. Like, I'm going to go deep and figure out what this is all about. And I mean, that's effectively how I ended up in this role at Zapier. It's like every opportunity that I've been given to go deep and learn something about it, it's just like this curiosity and this willingness to just try things on the fringe and learn more about the business and just get in there. And it's just something like early in the career that was really helpful for me to kind of get into that next role. And then even today, it's just like, I generally like to say yes and just learn about things as much as I possibly can. So saying yes pays off sometimes. It's in funny ways.
That story is nuts. You literally went from cold call to Stanley Cup photo shoot
in like 2 hours. It was wild. It was unbelievable.
Thank you for sharing. That's crazy. Ryan, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So you're a successful guy, but I ask everybody who comes on the show if you could give us one thing you've screwed up in your career. Could be this role or a different one.
Oh yeah, I have a really fun sort of tactical one. I worked as an analyst at the Bank of New York Mellon, fresh out of school. Every night I had to like create this file for a sweep. And one day I made some sort of sorting error before I did a VLOOKUP, and I transposed account numbers for like a few thousand accounts with millions of dollars in this sweep. And it somehow got caught with some like automatic reconciliation that night. So the sweep got canceled. It did not sweep that night. And the next day I came in and my boss told me, he said, you were effectively sending like tens of millions of dollars to the wrong sweep accounts because of your formula error yesterday. So,
Whoa.
I could tell you that I've been very, very, very meticulous about all my QA and sort of like fat finger mistakes since then. It's like, yeah.
That's crazy. What do you wish you knew earlier as a CFO?
Something that I've started doing recently that has been incredibly helpful is I joined a bunch of like CFO specific professional networks. And almost everything that we do as CFOs, somebody else has already done and done pretty dang well. It wasn't until a few years ago that I got introduced to most of these, but it's been an incredibly valuable resource. And I would just say, like, one quick plug here, all the folks who've shared their time with me, it's just incredible, their willingness to do that. And I'm just very, very appreciative of the coaching and chat and the chats that I've had with folks. It's been really meaningful and helpful.
Totally. It's a stupid saying, it takes a village, but it's like, it does get lonely sometimes. And also a lot of the stuff we're doing, it's not recreating the wheel. So if you can go to somebody who can give you that life hack to figure something out, like how do I run an employee secondary, or how do I do, how do I run my first audit, like that, you want to go to people who have seen around those corners.
Absolutely.
Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done?
We use, NetSuite is our ERP. We use Zip for procurement, P2P, and we were on Adaptive, but we actually implemented a tool lately that we're really in love with. Love the founding team. It's a great tool. It's called Aleph. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I'm a huge fan of Aleph. Yeah. Albert and the crew are awesome.
Huge fan. Albert and those guys are crushing it. We are just finding new, incredibly cool ways to integrate it. And just like, we've just got data feeds pulling in from all over the company, building tons of awesome automated models. And it's just, we're impressed. It's a great tool. And
you mentioned that your company is PLG. They're probably like the first PLG FP&A tool I've ever encountered.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they're definitely one of the few.
Yeah, they can get you like up and running wicked fast.
Very quick. Yeah, they're super responsive.
What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
We do these company retreats every year. And as part of it, we have like a free day where we allow folks to sort of have a budget to go do like a fun team activity together. And somebody somehow thought going off by themselves and buying a Nintendo Switch was an acceptable way to spend their free day. So we saw that one come through and had to have a bit of a difficult conversation.
That one's tough. Ryan, this has been a blast. Thanks for your radical transparency and also just all the career insights. This has been a really fun one for me.
Yeah, likewise. Happy to be here.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.